Tonight, we step into Kilkenny, Ireland, the year 1324. Picture narrow medieval streets, stone houses with smoke curling from thatched rooftops, and the constant whisper of suspicion. You walk past the home of Alice Kyteler, a wealthy woman with more gold than most men in the city and 4 dead husbands behind her. Her neighbours whisper she didn't just bury them, she helped them into the grave. And here's the unsettling part. Alice Kyteler wasn't a poor outcast living on the margins of society. She was rich, influential, connected. Her marriages had tied her to some of the wealthiest men in Kilkenny, and every time a husband died, her fortune grew. She was the kind of woman most men in medieval Ireland feared quietly, but tolerated publicly because wealth was power, and Alice had plenty of both. But power makes enemies, and in Alice's case, her stepchildren became the loudest ones. They whispered to anyone who would listen that she was no ordinary widow. She was a sorceress. She had the devil at her side. From the moment the first rumours began to stir, Alice's story was never just about witchcraft. It was about property, inheritance, gender, and fear. It was about a church desperate to stamp out heresy, and a bishop determined to make his name by proving the devil had found a home in Ireland. And it was about how quickly whispers could become kindling, and how someone else's body could be thrown to the flames while the powerful slipped away. You can almost hear the footsteps on Kilkenny's cobblestones. The bishop is in town, the court is stirring, a servant is dragged before a crowd, trembling, accused of crimes no one can really explain, but everyone wants to believe. The firewood is stacked, the match is struck. And Alice Kyteler, she's nowhere to be found. Alice was born into privilege at a time when women rarely rose above the roles assigned to them. By birth, she was Anglo-Irish, part of a community that had grown wealthy after the Norman invasion of Ireland. The Kytelers weren't peasants tilling the fields. They were merchants, moneylenders, people who dealt in coins and contracts. Alice learned early that money was both shield and weapon. She married 4 times, each marriage increasing her wealth and influence. First to William Outlaw, a banker who gave her her first foothold in the financial world. Then, after his death, to Adam le Blund, a wealthy landowner. When he died, she married Richard de Val, another prosperous figure in Kilkenny society. Finally, she wed Sir John le Poer, a baron with influence that stretched beyond Kilkenny's walls. Each time, Alice walked away richer. Each time, whispers followed her. By the time Sir John began to wither, those whispers had hardened into accusations. His children, Alice's stepchildren, believed she had bewitched him. They claimed his body wasted away because of her potions, her powders, her secret rites performed in the dead of night. They told the bishop she didn't pray to God but to demons, that she consorted with a spirit named Robin Artisan, who came to her as a black dog, sometimes as a man, sometimes as both at once. To the medieval imagination, that was proof enough. Every culture has its monsters. For 14th century Ireland, the familiar, a demon in animal form, was as real as the stones beneath their feet. But accusations of witchcraft were never just about the supernatural. They were about property. Alice's fortune threatened to pass not to her stepchildren, but to her own son, William Outlaw. For her stepchildren, accusing Alice of witchcraft wasn't just about purging evil. It was about reclaiming what they believed was theirs. Enter Bishop Richard de la Drede. A Franciscan friar from England, newly appointed Bishop of Ossory, he was zealous, uncompromising, and eager to root out heresy wherever he found it. For him, Alice Kyteler was more than just a wealthy widow with suspiciously bad luck in husbands. She was an opportunity. Ireland hadn't yet seen a witch trial like the ones emerging in Europe. If he could prove sorcery here, he would cement his authority. The problem was Alice wasn't some powerless peasant. She had money, influence, and friends in high places. When the bishop tried to have her arrested, Kilkenny's elites closed ranks around her. They protected her because in protecting Alice, they were protecting themselves. After all, if a wealthy merchant's widow could be dragged off in chains, who among them would be safe? So the bishop shifted strategy. If he couldn't touch Alice directly, he'd go after the people around her. And that's where Petronilla de Meath enters the story. Petronilla was Alice's maid, a woman of little standing, easy to seize, easy to break. Under torture, Petronilla confessed to everything the bishop wanted. She said Alice and her followers had renounced Christianity, that they had sacrificed animals, smeared themselves with the bodies of murdered infants, and performed rites in honor of demons. She said Alice had used sorcery to poison her husbands and charm her lovers. The words were dragged from her with whips and fire, but once spoken, they could not be taken back. Imagine the scene. Petronilla, beaten and terrified, dragged through the streets of Kilkenny, her confession shouted to the crowds. The bishop thundered from the pulpit that the devil had been found in Ireland, and here was the proof. People who had once whispered in corners now shouted in public. And in that shouting, Alice's fate was sealed, even if her body was nowhere to be found, because Alice Kyteler did what only the wealthy and well-connected could do. She escaped. Before the trial could pin her down, she fled Ireland, vanishing into the historical shadows. Some said she went to England, others that she disappeared entirely, perhaps with the help of the very demon she was accused of consorting with. The truth is, no one knows. She left her servant to face the flames in her place. Petronilla de Meath was whipped, tied to a stake, and burned alive in November 1324. She was the first woman in Ireland executed for witchcraft. As the fire consumed her, the crowd watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. For the bishop, it was victory. For the townsfolk, it was entertainment and warning. For Alice, it was survival. But survival carried its own shadow. Alice Kyteler became a ghost in her own story. She was never caught, never punished, never vindicated. Her name lived on not as a widow or merchant, but as Ireland's first witch. Petronilla's ashes blew away on the wind, but the precedent they set would echo for centuries. Think about what this trial really meant. It was the early 14th century. Europe hadn't yet plunged into the frenzy of witch hunts that would later consume tens of thousands. In some ways, Alice's trial was the dress rehearsal. The script was already in place. Accusations of heresy, a confession ripped from someone weaker, a public execution to satisfy fear and faith alike. The pattern that would sweep through Europe and eventually Salem had one of its first rehearsals in Kilkenny. And what drove it all? Fear, yes. Religion, yes. But also greed. Her stepchildren wanted her wealth. The bishop wanted her downfall to elevate his authority. The townsfolk wanted a story, a scapegoat, something to believe in. Witchcraft provided all of it. It always does. Stand in that square for a moment in your mind. The flames are dying down. The crowd is dispersing. Somewhere, Alice is alive, perhaps looking over her shoulder, perhaps laughing, perhaps terrified. But here in Kilkenny, the bishop has his victory. The people have their witch. And history has its precedent. Alice Kyteler's story is haunting not just because of the accusations of sorcery, but because it reveals the machinery behind the witch trials to come. It shows us how superstition, politics, greed, and fear could weave together into a rope strong enough to drag someone to the stake. It shows us how the powerful could escape while the powerless burned. And it shows us how quickly a woman's life could be rewritten by the men who wanted her gone. Tonight, you've walked the streets of Kilkenny, you've heard the whispers, you've watched the fire, and you've seen how history begins, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a rumour, a servant's forced confession, and a bishop eager to strike a match. The question lingers, was Alice Kyteler a sorceress who poisoned her husbands and consorted with demons? Or was she simply a woman too wealthy, too independent, too powerful to be tolerated? Maybe the real magic was her ability to vanish, leaving others to burn in her place. And maybe the real devil in Kilkenny wasn't Robin Artisan at all, but the greed, fear, and ambition that turned one woman into a witch and another into ashes. As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.